Babies were always thought to be blank slates, until research in the 80s began to question that idea. Today, science has proven that there's more to kids than we originally assumed. In fact, a new study in the journal Development and Psychopathology shows a link between a biological mother's trauma and behavioral issues in her child, even when the kid is adopted as a newborn. As an adoptee herself, Janet Sherlund believes that the adoption process caters more towards the parents' best interests, not the children.
The birth certificates list our adoptive parents as our parents from our birth on, and that's not true. That child will grow up with a sense of abandonment and loss and grief and otherness and not knowing where they came from and what their heritage is and what their authentic identity is. And that will make it very difficult for them to grow into a authentic and independent and intact human being.
Sherlund is the author of her memoir, Abandoned at Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me. Her parents adopted all 4 of their children. And while they were so excited to have kids of their own, there was always a disconnect that was felt throughout the home.
And you could feel it. You could feel it sitting around the dinner table at night. You felt like you were sitting with participants, but we weren't bonded. You could just sort of feel, you don't even have to know anything to feel this. As an adoptee, you feel the difference. You feel the sort of separate almost bubble that you're in from everyone else, even if they're family members, people that you're close to. If you're not sharing blood and genes and all that, there's this feeling of detachment and otherness and separateness. You're not seeing yourself mirrored in other people. You're not seeing like, oh, I act like that or I look like that, that mirroring is a very critical component of childhood development. And so you feel this strange detachment and you don't understand it.
Her family was always open about adoption. Sherlund was even there when they picked up her new baby sister. But that feeling of disconnect wasn't acknowledged. So while something felt off, even as a little girl, Sherlund had convinced herself that it must have just been due to something she had done wrong. But after reflecting back on her life as an adult, she thinks that her parents probably felt it too. However, they chose to sweep it under the rug in favor of appearing to have the perfect American life that was expected in the 50s and 60s when Sherlund was growing up.
My mother was a brilliant woman and a really successful woman, but probably should never have been a mother. She didn't enjoy being a mother. And though in the 1950s, that's what you did to be perceived as the ultimate woman. And so she, of course, wanted to excel in all ways. And so she adopted 4 of us, but found it like motherhood is. It's really messy and it's complicated and it's difficult and it's very stressful. So she wasn't able to be a present, loving, giving mother. She was there, but her ability to put our needs before hers kind of didn't exist.
But just like how the idea of a perfect life was boiled down to being married with kids, successful parenting was assumed to be accomplished with just one thing: love, the Band-Aid that could fix any situation, except when it couldn't.
Babies were blank slates, and all they needed was the loving arms of adoptive parents who wanted them, and love would be all they needed. No one understood or talked about the trauma and the grief and the loss that really was behind adoption. It wasn't that fairy tale story. It is not. And one of the things that's difficult to say and difficult to ask adoptive parents to understand is that love is not enough to heal the trauma of adoption.
Love is never enough, even in biological families. You have to be a sensitive, caring parent who is focusing on your child's needs first and foremost. You have needs too, which could and should be met. But if you're an effective parent, you're focusing on the child's needs first. And adopted children have unique needs that, if not addressed properly, will lead to complications, which can lead to adjustment difficulties.
That's Dr. David Brodzinski, Professor Emeritus of Clinical and Developmental Psychology at Rutgers University. He's also a research and project consultant for the National Center on Adoption and Permanency. He says that adopted children need an environment with open communication to feel comfortable asking any questions they may have.
And when that occurs, when there is this communicative open environment, children do better because they feel heard. They feel that their confusion, they feel that their sadness, they feel that their sense of loss, they feel that their worry is all normal and that the parents will help them in whatever way is possible.
Brodzinski says that while the feeling of loss is universal, it manifests differently in adoptees. For many, including Sherlund, it feels like having a big black hole in the center of their body.
You feel like someone just took a cookie cutter and that your middle is missing, and it's just this big black eternity. And then that's just always there, and you just accept it and you learn to live with it.
The loss felt is not only attached to the birth parents, but the extended biological family and often other siblings.
Most adoptions are not private adoptions where a birth mother and or a birth father voluntarily relinquish. Most adoptions are child welfare adoptions. And in those cases, of course, children are removed from their families for cause. That's one thing to recognize is that when children go into foster care, it's rare for them to be in one foster. They get moved a lot. So there's one loss after another,
including teachers, coaches, and therapists, too. Interestingly, the feeling of loss doesn't always have to do with people. Brodzinski says that there's also a loss of social status that these kids can feel.
Very often, children will get positive messages about being adopted, but they also come to understand as they get older that their friends and others don't envy them being adopted. So it's okay for you to be adopted. I'm glad I'm not adopted, is what they understand. That's usually a kind of subtext to the messaging that adoptees experience. And they come to recognize that, others see them as different, less fortunate.
Which can lead to lower self-esteem and self-worth. With this entire experience being set onto the shoulders of little kids, it's not hard to believe that it can lead to adjustment problems. In Sherlund's family, each kid figured out a different way to cope with their feelings.
There were 4 of us. 2 were rebels and 2 were the perfect adoptees, which is very typical of adoptees. You're either pushing the boundaries to see if these parents are going to reject you as well, or you're doing everything perfectly so they won't reject you. And my older brother was a handful. And my mother once said, oh, at least we can take comfort in the fact that he's not really ours. I tended to be a baby and a child and a young adult who only found safety in trying to be perfect so that they wouldn't give me away again. I didn't feel important. I didn't feel like we were a priority. We, in fact, weren't a priority of moms. But my behavior came more from that place of, wow, my birth mother, my birth family didn't want me. I was discarded. I was given away. I better be perfect because this family might not be perfect, but it's fine. It's great. And I'm not going to cause any problems. I don't want anyone to give me away again.
Though Sherlund's behavior came from a place of trauma, she looked like the ideal child on the outside. Unfortunately, she says that it's something many people not only overlook, but often praise.
I've had sometimes people say, oh, I know friends or family members who have both biological children and adopted children. And gee, the biological children are a mess, but the adopted children are just great. And my response to them is always, that could be a real problem. They're the ones that might be feeling the most and having the most trauma and fear because they are not free to be themselves and not free to express negative emotion.
While a majority of adoptees are within the normal range of adjustment difficulties according to Brodzinski, they still have higher odds of attempting suicide. Additionally, the most recent Profile of Prison Inmates report, done in 2016 by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, estimates that 1/5 of the U.S. prison population is former foster care children.
Adopted kids, regardless of whether they're placed as babies or later in life, whether it's domestic adoption or international adoptions, they have a higher level of adjustment difficulties than non-adopted kids. Adoption as a child welfare practice has served children well in general, and yet there are aspects of how adoption has been practiced, past and present, which pose difficulties for the adopted person in terms of understanding who they are, forming a secure and healthy and well-integrated sense of self. And so we're constantly trying to improve the adoption system, how adoption is practiced, and the kinds of services that we can offer adopted families, as well as birth parents, both pre-placement as well as post-placement.
One idea that Sherlund is a big proponent of is keeping kids with a member of their biological family. And if no one from the family is able to care for the child, keeping an open line of communication between them and the kid is the next best option.
The more information that, if that's a situation no one in the family can take or wants to take the child, the more information about that family, the actual identity of that family, pictures, information, maybe contact with, the open adoption model and contact with family members, even if not the birth parents, but aunts and uncles, grandparents, siblings, whoever, and taking that knowledge into the adoptive family and having the adoptive family acknowledge that and talk about that and talk about your other mother, your other father, your other family, and urging them to know as much about and to talk about that with respect and love and, not judgment. Love is wonderful and caring for another's child is wonderful. But the fact is, adoptees are someone else's children, and that has to be accepted and respected within the adopted family, I think, for it to cause less harm to the adoptee.
Join us next week as we discuss the impact of open versus closed adoptions and which one is best for the children. Sherlund's book, Abandoned at Birth, is available now wherever you buy books. You can find more information about Janet Sherlund, Dr. David Brodzinski, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.